Welcome to CEO TV. I'm Doug Roberts. I'm a three-time CEO myself and spend much of my waking professional hours with CEOs. I have a C-suite consulting firm called Rocket Leaders, and I also facilitate two Vistage peer advisory groups for CEOs, which is all about helping them and helping each other make great decisions about important strategic matters. I've worked with over 50 business owners and CEOs, and I have a pretty good idea of the content that they're interested in, and that's why I have started CEO TV. I'm delighted to have Brad Barth on the show today. Brad is partner and supervising attorney for one of the nation's top law firms, Barth Calderon. The firm specializes in business asset protection and estate planning for families and key people in their organizations. As an authority, Brad is a frequent lecturer, and he's actually a top-rated speaker, the way I know him, to Vistage CEO peer groups nationwide, of which 36 of my own clients take part. So Brad, welcome to CEO TV.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doug. Thank you.
Great to have you. How is COVID treating you?
It's been challenging. I think for ourselves as business owners, we're no exception from our clients. So we're all kind of making our way through it. We're all managing. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, in doing my research for our interview and knowing what CEOs often express to me as issues, I have a set of questions, but let me just suggest that you give us a high level of areas that are covered by asset protection, and then we'll just kind of roll from there.
Sure. Great starting point. So a lot of people ask, what is asset protection? Is it something where I can just kind of secret my assets away and be completely reckless? And that's actually the complete wrong answer. Is it something where I can hide my assets and not disclose them if I'm asked? And that's also the wrong answer. What asset protection really is all about, it's simply just finding devices to separate assets from liabilities. We all have assets, and as business owners, we all have liabilities. Liabilities can come from sources of the business operations itself, could come from products we put in the stream of commerce, it could come from employees, but we also, as business owners, also have our own personal sources of liabilities. It could be things that we do on an individual basis. Something as pedestrian as driving a car, maybe something that our adult children do, maybe something that our spouses do, maybe something that our business partner does, which winds up having a liability to us. Mm-hmm. So what we try to do is identify, Doug, what are the assets of the owner? What are the assets of the business? Okay. And how can we create a barrier or some type of limitation between those? So what asset protection is, it's about separating the assets from sources of liability, insulating those assets. So if the assets come under attack, they are not readily available for the claims of a creditor, which ultimately gets us to a position to enter into a fast and favorable settlement. Okay. So if you ask me what is asset protection, it's about manipulating the litigation playing field to allow you to get into a more favorable and faster settlement as a result of the planning. Got it. Than you would have been without the planning.
So two questions along those lines. The first, and I'll ask both in case they meld together. Sure. Mm-hmm. The first is typically what assets are we talking about? And then the second is what are the typical liabilities that these lawsuits expose you to?
Well, the second one certainly is the more difficult one because the spectrum of liability is about as big as your imagination. Right. That's the American way, So, I'll tackle the first one. The assets that people have. Again, it could be as a business owner, you got two sides of the same coin. We got the personal side. As a business owner, you're accumulating your own personal wealth, house, retirement plan, brokerage account, cash value life insurance policies, rental properties, precious metals. So those are the individual assets. Mm-hmm. Then you look over on the corporate side, because for many business owners, there really isn't much of a separation, between what you own and what your business owns. Now you got your own inventory, intellectual property, equipment, property itself, the goodwill of the company itself.
Mm.
It would, cash reserves. So those are the assets from a business owner's perspective. As far as theories of liability, like I said, just use your imagination. Open up the newspaper, and you can answer that question every single day.
So there's not they're not a set of liabilities that often come up as opposed to others. It's just
Okay, the ones that we see more often. Okay, so you got car accidents, right? Employee related matters, tenant related matters for rental properties, product liability issues, right? Those types of things. Habitability matters. No negligence, professional negligence matters. So that's kind of pedestrian for those types of things.
Yeah. So Brad, I'm a CEO. I have a partner. We are, unfortunately, it's a 50-50 partnership. We haven't done a buy-sell agreement in a while. We've got a rental. We have a separate, company in which we have set up we bought a piece of property that we lease from the business. What do I need to be thinking about?
Okay, well, whenever you are involved in and I'm guessing it's some kind of a general partnership, you got two or more people together, go out to make a profit. Boom, that's the legal definition of a partnership.
Yeah.
Well, the challenge here is you don't have any barriers between the liabilities. So you have a concept called joint and several liability, also known as the deep pockets rule. So if you and your partner are out there, whatever it is that you're doing, whatever it is that you're hustling, whether it's a product or yourself as a professional coach, for example, whether you're doing it or whether your partner's doing it, you're both 100% liable for the activities of that enterprise. So that's the first thing I want to do. So I want to find some way to limit the liability that you have so that if you are engaged in an activity with a partner, and if you do have partnership-based liability, at least you're able to contain what is at risk. Right now, I said deep pockets, meaning everything. Everything you currently have, everything you've worked for, and even your potential future earnings could be subject to that liability. So what I would say the first thing, Doug, is, well, we need to put you into some type of entity to limit that liability. So you're looking at corporations, limited partnerships, LLCs. At least this way, whatever you've put into the enterprise, that's what's at risk. And the deep pockets ends with the enterprise itself. No liability would then befall upon you. So just as an operational side. Now you talked about a building. Okay, you're leasing a building, even though you may not be the actual owner.
We're the owner. We have a separate corporation or whatever we set up to own that building, and now our business is leasing it.
Okay, great. Right. So if you actually have your owner occupied of a building, and if you have it in a separate entity, which is probably the right way to do it, so that way you're acting as a corporation, as we call it, OpCo, your operating company. You then have like a rental agreement with like an LLC that owns the building, for example. So you have an owner occupied. That's the right way to go about it. So that, again, so a liability to you on a personal side or malpractice side doesn't take away one of the assets, the building. Okay. But now you got a problem with the building. So something happens on the building, you don't want to be without a place to earn a living. So that's one of the challenges with owning a building that has other tenants in it. Because if that building is inside an entity, we'll just call it an LLC. That's the most frequent way of owning it. Some other tenant slips and falls. They're not going to sue Doug. They're not going to sue Doug Co. They're going to sue the LLC that owns the building. Well, guess who else is occupying that building that needs to use the facilities to earn a living? You, Doug Co. So as a result, that can be a little bit of a challenge, right? And sometimes there really isn't much way to get around that, especially if it's a multi-unit building, except a very good and comprehensive insurance policy. So those are some of the things that we type of look for.
And are there considerations, you mentioned LLC, are there considerations about setting it up as S Corp versus LLC versus C Corp?
Yes, absolutely. The S versus C question is a conversation between you and your tax advisor. So it's one thing that we try to steer away from, is trying to get too heavily involved in tax advice. We'd much rather work with your team of professionals, bankers, CPAs, and lawyers together as a team to kind of come up with the proper way of setting things up. But and also it's important because some assets really aren't appropriately held in entities that are taxed as a C corp or taxed as an S corp,
Right.
specifically real estate, for example. You much rather have it at a disregarded or at a partnership level for ease of manipulation.
Right.
So, is there a difference between LLCs versus corporations? And the answer is yes, tremendous difference, but it also depends upon who you're concerned about. So I'll just use you again, Doug. I've
Mhm.
done a lot of Vistage talks. I know a lot of Vistage chairs, and most Vistage chairs say, well, I'm giving professional coaching in addition to being a Vistage chair.
Mhm.
What should I do? Do I have to have all this fancy schmancy stuff, Brad, you just spent 3 hours talking to us about? And my answer basically is no. Because Doug, what is it that most
Relate.
Vistage chairs have, right? You have a bank account, a flip chart, some colored markers, right? and a modest bank account, right?
Right.
So
Right.
so your liability isn't so, well, how about this? The assets aren't like a building or large cash reserve. So I'm not really worried about someone from the outside trying to reach in and grab you. And
Mhm.
they can't grab you, Doug, and say, Doug, you're now going to work for me for the next 20 years. That's something called indentured servitude, and we did away with that a long time ago. So if I'm not worried about somebody from the outside, I'm just more worried about what is Doug doing? What type
Mhm.
of advice or liability or malpractice are you giving out?
Mhm.
So my concern is more from a outside rather than an internal kind of liability. So as a
Right.
result, corporations are just fine. A corporation in your home state is just fine. An
Mhm.
LLC in your home state is just fine.
Mhm.
Um, but if we now have large assets that we're worried about protecting, now we start looking at, okay, maybe not a corporation, maybe it is an LLC, maybe it's not California, maybe it is going to be Delaware or Wyoming or one of these other more protective states.
Right.
So to answer that question, you really have to know, back to what I said in my opening comment, what are the assets? What are the liabilities? You need to know what the vulnerabilities are so you know how to properly address it. Right. So it's a great question, but it's
Yeah.
one that requires a little bit of analysis to know know the client in order to answer that one.
Right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Um, Another thing that often gets in the way of some of my clients is either not having one, having it done 20 years ago, and it not being relevant. And it's
Yeah.
called the famous buy
Oh
sell
yeah.
agreement.
I knew exactly where you're going with that one. As soon as you
So,
said 20 years ago, I said, oh, that's the buy
what are
sell question.
what are the do's and don'ts, and what should we be doing in buy sell agreements?
Okay, absolutely. I think one of the most important things is to have it reviewed on a regular basis.
Mm.
My father, who's the senior partner of the firm, likes to call these premarital agreements for business owners.
Right.
Right? Because when you get involved in business with somebody, you're basically married to them at a professional level. And just like you want to be able to classify the assets, you want to have an exit strategy, you also want to know who you're going to be in business with should something happen to your business partner.
Mm.
So the right of first refusal and control mechanism is hugely important.
Mhm.
But if it isn't kept up to date, and this is the problem, Doug, is that most businesses have a kind of like an upward trajectory.
Mhm.
And so if you came out with a valuation or whatever method that you use to value the company, and that may change over time depending upon how the company has changed.
Right.
That methodology, you're going to be held accountable to that because this is your own little personal constitution within among the partners.
Mhm.
And so now the value doesn't accurately represent the company.
Mhm.
There's insufficient assets. Typically, it's an insurance policy. There's insufficient sources of liquidity to be able to exercise that right of first refusal.
Mhm.
It causes problems between, this is how much it's worth. No, this is how much it's worth. I
Mhm.
don't want to be in business with your spouse. You and I are great partners, Doug, but you don't like my wife. I don't like your wife, and we're happy that way.
Mhm.
Next thing you know, we're in business with each other. Or it could be your adult kids who don't know the first
Mhm.
darn thing about running the business.
Mm-hmm.
So not only does it need to be kept up to date, because there's all kinds of tools that we can use for creditor protection, involuntary transfers, moral turpitude issues. For example, what happened with Weinstein recently, how
Mm-hmm.
that could be a triggering event to get rid of a toxic individual.
Yeah.
A loss of professional licenses, um, divorces. Sometimes it's never even part of it. Well, you and I, again, are great business partners, Doug, but if you lose half of your business, I'm now 50%,
Yes.
you 25, with a hostile ex-spouse at 25, it makes
Yeah.
it very difficult for you and I to run the enterprise.
Yes.
So
I have seen that often.
oh yeah, yeah, and I've seen it from an estate perspective also, because that's like you said, the second hat I wear is an estate planner, and so you see it where one party passes away, and now you have a surviving spouse or I guess adult kids who now wind up being the joint owner of the business, and they don't know the first darn thing, and it goes
Right.
from a very successful, and they run it into the ground, or they just sell it to get rid of that toxic relationship.
Right.
So probably next to an estate plan, probably the second most important document to be updated and reviewed as by business owners is the buy sell. Do they get stale? Absolutely. Do they get stale quickly? Absolutely. So something that should be looked at. I always tell my clients, maybe every 12 to 18 months, as you're doing your taxes and you're
Mm-hmm.
doing your corporate minutes, you're doing your annual housekeeping, just take a look at it. Take a look and see what's changed.
Yeah.
How have you valued it? Does it still represent? Do you have enough insurances, right? And just like everything else, and I'll give you this one in case you don't answer it. Every 5 years, every five
Okay.
years, your estate plan should be updated. I
Okay.
tell people life happens, death,
Okay.
birth, marriages, you come into money, you lose money, you no longer like your sister who's your healthcare agent. So, and part of that is your corporate documents and buy sell as well. It
Okay.
should not go longer than 5 years. And that is too
Okay.
long in a buy sell environment. Yeah,
That is
great
too long in the
question.
buy-sell
Great
environment.
question.
So the buy-sell environment you're saying is an 18-month review.
Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely.
And the 5-year review is your own estate plus the corporate documents, et cetera.
Yeah, that's the longest it should go. Some people just
Okay.
don't keep up with it. So your
Yeah.
corporate documents and estate documents should be at least looked at once every year to 18 months.
Okay.
But they should at least be for sure looked at no longer than 5 years. All right, no longer than 5 years.
Okay, Brad. So as we're in Silicon Valley. I'm in San Francisco,
Mm-hmm.
and IP is a huge thing here.
Yep.
So how do I need to think about IP in the context of asset protection?
Yeah, great question. Here again, it's because many companies start off, and a company, Doug, as you know this through working with your own clients, companies have a life cycle, right? They start off as infants, they become children, adolescents, mature adults, ultimately it's succession. Let's get past this thing along. Well, there's no difference in a company. You start off with a company, maybe you went to some online service and you started your corporation, and then you speak with your tax professional. You say, well, I need to buy a building. Okay, well, I need to get some IP. You start accumulating assets, and one of those assets is the IP, and the IP can be worth nothing or it can be worth billions, especially in your area.
Mm-hmm.
So this goes back to what I was saying. Identify assets, identify liabilities. So here, if you have a corporation or an entity and you have your largest asset is the IP, and inside the same entity as that largest asset are your employees, your contract obligations, the drivers, the sexually harassing supervisors, if they're all inside the same entity,
Mm-hmm.
where the IP is, or whatever the diamond is, whatever that is, whatever that
Right.
golden goose, whatever that thing is that makes the money, find a way to get it out. And
Okay.
there are ways of taking the IP and simply pulling it out. We just got done a moment ago talking about Doug Co. was a corporation, and you were owner occupied of a building inside an LLC, and
Right.
you had a owner occupied lease agreement back and forth.
Right.
That's exactly how the IP should be. You
Okay.
got Doug Co. and you take the IP, it should be inside its own protective entity,
Mm-hmm.
and you should have a licensing agreement going back
That's
and forth.
interesting. Wow.
So now Doug, you, God forbid, have an accident, you have a liability, Doug Co. goes down in flames.
Wow.
You didn't lose the IP, right? The
Wow.
IP is protected. So then you can become Doug Code 2, right?
Yeah,
Relicense back the IP and you're up and running.
that's
So there
brilliant.
are various ways because of taxes and capital gain issues
Mm-hmm.
of moving that IP out. But the
Okay.
bottom line is it should come out.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is news to me. Thank you. That's
Good.
a really good. Well, everything you're saying is news to me. But um, so the cash. Okay.
Yep.
I've been in this business for 15, 20 years, pretty conservative. We've done pretty well. And I got a ton of cash
Yep.
sitting in my company.
Mm-hmm.
What do I need to think about?
Right, right. So this goes back again, it all goes back to that same example. I got a corporation, I got my IP, I got my building, I got my cash reserves. That's all the assets. And I said, what else do you have in there? I just rattled them off. I got my employees, right? I got the drivers. I got my contract obligations. So you have a inside the same bucket where the assets are is also where the liabilities are. So
Okay.
just like we pulled out the land, just like we pulled out the IP, let's pull out the cash. Now, not all the cash.
Mm-hmm.
This is a balance because I like to say you should have at least 3 months or 1/4's worth of your O's and O's, your operations and
Mm-hmm.
obligations. Because if your company is insolvent, you can have money in the bank and be insolvent.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
don't have enough money to take care of your normal operations and obligations. Because if your company is insolvent, everything you do by default is called alter ego. And you heard that before.
Okay.
It's called piercing the corporate veil. So you
Right.
want to make sure that you are a solvent company in addition to all the other formalities.
Right.
So whatever that magic number is, let's just say for purpose of this conversation, it's $300,000. I need $100,000 a month for my obligations and a little extra squish room. So times 3 for 1/4, I need $300,000. Great. Why do you have $1 million in your reserves account?
Well, why not?
Well,
What's wrong with that?
because
You're my attorney. What's wrong with that?
the problem here is because when the company gets sued and now your company is in I call it the Tasmanian devil, when the little creditor is running around and trying to suck up all the assets, well, we pulled out the IP a while ago. We got the land out. What's still sitting inside there? $1 million of cash.
Okay.
And once you get sued, or you can't then pull the money out. That's called at least in California, avoidable transaction. In other parts of the country, it's called a fraudulent transfer. You have money that's at risk.
Mm-hmm.
So the best place for it to be is in some place where there's no liabilities. Get it out of Dougco. Keep what you need for your O's and O's. Put the money someplace safe as long as we can do so tax-wise. And if you need an injection, you need a capital contribution, okay, you go to the Bank of Doug. The Bank of Doug gives a loan to the company,
Nice.
takes a secured interest back,
Okay.
just like B of A would do, or Wells Fargo, any other business bank. You can now, you lent money to the company, you take back a promissory note, it's secured against the building, it's secured against the ARs with a UCC, and now if the company gets sued,
Okay.
in previous example, Doug, the cash was at risk and they're going to just take it away. There's no inherent protections.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you lent money back, you perfected your loan. You're in first priority. So if the creditor does try to liquidate the company,
Mm-hmm.
guess what? You get paid back first, just like B of A
Wow.
gets paid back first. And so
Wow.
by pulling the money out and then lending it back,
And you are a creditor.
you didn't make the company cash poor.
Mm-hmm.
But you lent money back in and it's secured, and you as the investor, I don't know any business owner who hasn't put money into the enterprise.
Right.
So at least protect your own investment.
Okay.
And that's why. So why wouldn't I keep $1 million when I only need 300,000? And that's the reason why.
Okay.
If you want to put $1 million in, fine, take it out and then lend back the extra 700,000 if it makes you sleep good at night. Fine.
Beautiful. I'm gonna take that one back. So this is the most popular topic among my business owners, and that's called personal guarantees.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is there Is there something I can do with those? Is there?
Yeah. That's a tough one. And I'll
Hmm.
tell you why it's tough, because it goes back to what I just mentioned a second ago about voidable transactions and fraudulent transfers. Now, when we're talking about asset protection, we typically are thinking forward, right? We're looking for, but what we like to say, when you get blindsided, right? It's when you do something and the building falls down. You do something and you get into a car accident. It's things that you didn't anticipate.
Right.
Life happens, right?
Hmm.
I mean, go see COVID, right? Life happens.
Right.
The problem with guarantees is that you voluntarily brought that creditor into your life,
Mm.
and you probably brought them in very, very favorable terms to them.
Right.
They got your house, they got your car, they got your inventory, they got your firstborn, they got you.
Right.
So, and then at some point, something happens, you default on it. Only by definition, it's going to happen after the fact in the timeline. So by definition, Doug, you're already looking at a voidable transaction or fraudulent transfer.
Hmm.
They even have the financials that you presented to them when they gave you the loan. And then you come back later with LLCs and offshore this and offshore by this. That's all great, but look what you
Right.
showed up.
Yes.
So it's very difficult, but it doesn't mean that it can't still be done, because life goes on, right? Just because you get a line of credit doesn't mean that you can't pull your building out for that owner occupied protection or
Right.
pull the IP out. It just means that you're not going to be able to do that to hinder the bank on the guarantee.
Got it.
They have to also deal with what you did, right? So there is some collateral impacts on them, but you're not going to get out from under it. And I know
Okay.
that personal guarantees are four-letter words
Yeah.
on a personal side and on a
Right.
corporate side. But
Right.
the bottom line is that it's like I said, that there's voluntary creditors and there's involuntary creditors, and we
Yeah.
try to focus more so on the involuntary creditors, because those voluntary creditors, they're in there. And my
Yeah.
experience has also been that, it's kind of wrapped up with this, that my experience has been that with guarantees, at least they typically want to work with you, right? Because the bank doesn't want your business, right? The bank doesn't want your house. They really
Right.
want a going concern. They
Uh,
may be willing to renegotiate or work with you,
right.
which is very different than an involuntary creditor,
Yeah.
right? They do want your building, right?
Right.
They do want your cash. They don't want you to be a going concern. They're
Right.
spiteful. It's very different on who you're dealing with.
Brad, do you ever get involved with your clients in negotiating with the bank in that regard?
Yep. So thankfully, Barth Calderon, we have 31 personnel members,
Hmm.
half of which are professional attorneys, and within there we do have a couple of business litigators.
Okay.
They are familiar with our structuring. So I don't claim
Mhm.
myself to be this wonderful civil litigator,
Right.
but when necessary, we have the appropriate people
I
that
see.
we work with in
I
house. So it's not, you don't have to re-educate. Most time what we wind up doing is working with our client's current counsel. So they may have the insurance company may appoint a defense attorney for them, and then we wind up educating the attorney how to best use the structure to their advantage. How
Okay.
can you negotiate your settlement from a position
Right.
of strength? So we're either working with the client's current counsel that's been insurance appointed, or we have people on staff that we could certainly help them as well.
Okay. Great.
So, yeah,
So as we wrap up, this has been hugely informative, Brad.
great. Thank you.
Um, so I am the CEO. I've got this business, got a partner. Maybe we haven't looked at our buy sell. Maybe we've got a lot of cash in our business. We've covered a lot of topics. Now what do? I go to Barth Calderon or somebody, and what happens? What do I ask for?
Well, just like any kind of engagement, even with the example that we were playing with here, we don't know who you are, right? So the first thing that we always do is we always put our clients under some type of feasibility assessment. So basically, it's the know your client, right? It's the due diligence. I need to know who Doug is and what Doug Co is. So the first part of the process beyond the initial consultation. Just, do we like each other? Can I offer you something?
Mhm.
Once we engage, we typically have some type of feasibility assessment where you let me look at your documents, your corporate, your estate plan, your insurances, your assets. I need to know what you got.
Mhm.
And then we also have an ongoing dialogue as well. What are we worried about, right? What are the liabilities? What are the contracts you have out there? And so we call that an assessment. Basically, and we need that information to create our own file, because when we do the planning is done at a particular point in time.
Mhm.
So that as we move forward, and we need to be able to reflect back in time, what was going on at that particular point? What were we able to do from a solvency and insolvency issue that we spoke about?
Mhm.
What were the nature of the assets? Because you may have noticed that every asset, cash, corporation, retirement, real estate, they're all different. And they all have different characteristics, different vulnerabilities. Like cash, what would you rather have? Cash or someone's property? It's got a tenant and 3 loans on it.
Mhm. Right.
Much, of course, the
Right.
cash, right?
Right.
So we need to see what's more at risk than others, and
Okay.
how can we manipulate those without going too far?
Got it. Yeah.
Because if you go too far, then you wind up offending people. I'm not worried about offending opposing counsel. That's part of what my job is. But I don't want to offend the court, right? So you
Right.
want to be able to do things legitimately. And we need to have that assessment.
Mhm.
And that's how the engagement starts, Doug. You hire us. We start with this feasibility. And then from there, now that we have the diligence, we now then start the conversation. What direction are we going to go with this?
Okay.
Succession, tax planning, business reorganization, asset protection. And then we also have that information to look back in time as you come back for those reviews, 18 months, 2-3 years. We always go back to that initial assessment and how did we grow, right? What's different now than what it was 2 years ago?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yep, that's how it starts.
Well, that is fantastic, Brad. And we'll make sure to provide a link uh, to Barth Calderon. I know that you are nationwide. I guess you have worldwide clients, but certainly.
Believe it or not, I actually do.
Yeah. And there's probably not necessarily a sweet spot. I know you through the small to medium business of
Right.
it, but there's probably not necessarily a sweet spot for you.
Yeah, I think the small to mid-sized business is
Okay.
good. Of course, we have the mom and pop shops,
Yeah.
but we're not. Unfortunately, Microsoft is not my client.
Right.
You know?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
if you think about who is a Vistage member, right? That's our client.
Right.
That's our
Okay.
sweet spot, right?
Okay.
And you can look at that would be the appropriate, a little bit above, a little bit below. You got different organizations, but I think if you look at a Vistage member, that's who we're servicing.
Which is 5 to 300 million.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Right.
Brad, thanks so much.
You're very welcome.
For participating in CEO TV, and
Right.
we'll look forward to putting your information on the site, and best of luck to you.
Right. Okay, Doug. Thank you.